Hens. You see, I was brought up in a household. I was born in '34. I was brought up in a household where there was not too much tradition in it, and my mother and father struggled intensively to make a living. And we joined the temple probably shortly before my bar mitzvah. And as far as being part of an organized Jewish community, or even partial Jewish community, I wasn't, because my mother and father were not part of the community. My father would give to the UJA, or whatever it was called in those days, and my mother would fight and argue with him and say, look, we can't afford it. And that would happen each and every year. And but really, I only became actively involved in the Jewish community when I came back from law school in 1960. And a lot of the stories to which you made reference earlier, I heard about as well, because the Jewish community had plateaued by the time I got here. I mean, Bill Stern was the, what do we call it? I guess the executive director of our then Council of Jewish Organizations. And unfortunately, some things that happened in his regime led to the eventual collapse in some respects of the centralized community as we then knew it, as opposed to what it has come now in a more fractured and fragmented way. Because the Beth Jacob in the early 60s hired a rabbi by the name of Eugene Weiner. I don't know whether you remember him or not, Wendy, but he was a very dynamic young man. And he decided that the community Talmud Torah was not servicing the needs of the conservative shul. And at that time, the conservative shul was the number one. I mean, you had probably the more prominent business and professional people belong there, and it was basically the who's who. And he decided that they had to have their own afternoon school, and broke away from the community Talmud Torah, and then he left for Israel. And that's when I think there was probably somebody there for a short period of time, and then ultimately the Rabbi Silverman came in. I believe there was somebody in between for a very short period.
He broke away from the Talmud Torah before Rabbi Green did?
No, after. Rabbi Green established the day school, which I think started the whole thing. But you know what? You still could have had the community Talmud Torah, because the day school was a day school, you know, a full service program, with the exception of some type of physical education. But the straw that broke the camel's back was Rabbi Weiner. And if you think that the Hamel Hebrew Academy got instant acceptance, they didn't. It was a tough battle. And were it not for the perseverance of Rabbi Morton Green, it would never have survived.
Why was it tough?
Well, because you know what? In this community, there was the temple Sunday school, there was the community Talmud Torah, and that's the way things were done. And it was done from time immemorial. And that's where you got your Jewish education. Did you get a good Jewish education? For then, yes. But was the Jewish education that you got comparable to either to the day school? Absolutely not. I mean, it was much more intensified in that atmosphere. But that was the beginning of the end. Because, and of course, the difficulty at that particular time with the afternoon school at the Beth Jacob is that the late Max Stein was president of the Council of Jewish Organizations, and the finest leader of this community that I've ever seen. Taught me a lot. And he was also a past president of Beth Jacob for many, many years. So he could not fight, and didn't fight. And then ultimately we had a rapprochement in Hamilton. I think sometime in the 70s the community started doling out funds from the UJA to all educational institutions, and we had peace until very recently, when the Kahilla Day School opened up, which was absolutely unnecessary. Absolutely 100% unnecessary. If there had been some flexibility on the part of the academy, it would never have come into existence. So now we have 2 day schools, not enough kids, not enough money, and we're doomed to failure.
But there may yet be a hockey season.
Oh, wait. But I have to take you back now. I have some questions for you. Max Stein, one of the things we're focusing on in this project are prominent personalities, prominent people who made a difference in the community. Can you talk a bit about Max Stein?
Sure, be happy to. Max Stein, as most of the people in Hamilton would know, was an insurance broker. And Max taught me a lot about community work and taught me a lot about giving. And Max was a catalyst in this community. He was very, very good with younger people, because when I first met Max, I was in probably my late 20s. And I remember I had been president of one of the Hamilton Lodge B'nai B'rith, and he plucked me out to go on the executive of the then Council of Jewish Organizations, and he wanted me to be president. I was president at age 32. I know I'm not talking about Max Stein, but Max was the person that made things run in the community. He was the peacemaker. And our most prominent family then, and I believe today and all through the years, has been your family, is that Max was very close. I mean, the fact that 2 of his daughters married in, I suppose, helped a little bit, but in the days that I started off, Max and Morley Goldblatt were your 2 chief people. I mean, your grandfather, Frank Goldblatt, he was involved, but he was involved much like well, not as much as your dad, but he was involved in the sense that he was the elder of the people there. But if you wanted something to happen in this community, then you went to Max first, and then Max would be the entree into the Goldblatt family, or to Ken Sobel, who was alive then and flourishing, and very, very much of a domineering force. We had some very interesting characters when I became active in the community. But what Max taught me about giving, which is important, he says, you know, Bill, I will give even if I can't afford it. Because somehow or other, giving not only makes you feel good, but it always comes back to you. It always comes back. And I've never forgotten his words. And I've used them many times with other people. Because a very generous man, and a person who this community owes a great deal of indebtedness to. Now, I don't know, it's hard for me to say much else about him. And of course, your Uncle Abby was brought in to the community by Max, and Abby was taken from us far too young. And Abby not only was active in the Beth Jacob, but he was also very active within the community. And I remember with the 1967 war that I mean, everybody was fearful that Israel was going to be decimated, and at that particular time, now I could be confused. It could be 67 or it could be 72.
73, either one.
Yes, it was one or the other. And you know, without checking archives and whatnot, it was one or the other. We had to have a special campaign And I remember going to Abby, and I says, Abby, with what the other communities are giving, you guys have got to take the lead. You got to give $100,000. But you have to understand something. Nobody had ever given close to $100,000 in Hamilton at that time. Now, what did Abby do? They went back to the premises, spoke to Marvin, and lo and behold, we had that commitment, and that started us off on the best campaign we ever had. The best campaign, because I don't know who you're ever going to get to interview your father. Probably you're the only one that can do it.
Yeah.
And but I want to tell you, your father is the type of individual that frightens me a great deal, and frightens me in this respect, that I don't know what we're going to do, God forbid, when your dad is not around. Because I don't know how well you know Marvin. Marvin is, to my way of thinking, is unique. He is one of a kind. What is he, early 80s today? I mean, we need him for a long time, because there's not a more generous soul in this community and than he is. And and we've lost our business people. I mean, we don't have Jewish business people in this city who can afford to contribute large dollars to campaigns. That's one of our problems. I mean, when you talk about the Hamilton Hebrew Academy, why Rabbi Green has been so successful is not because of the pittance he gets from the Federation. It's the money he's been able to extract from people outside of the community. And it's hard. I'm off track with Max Stein again.
No, it's good, it's
No,
good.
that's fine.
Yeah, tell me, you said there were lots of interesting characters. Who else comes to mind?
Well, in the 60s and 70s, no campaign in this community could ever start without what we call the Big Three. And the Big Three were Marvin, Chester, and Frank Levy. And frankly, it was your father. I mean, Chester followed me as president of the CJO. Chester, in the 60s and 70s, was a very responsible person in this community. Very responsible.
Just put your hand down because I can't see.
Okay, was a very responsible person in this community. He changed afterwards. He is not the same man today that he was back in those times there. The man was an outstanding leader. I don't know what happened to him. Frank Levy was difficult to deal with, difficult. And the only person that could ever deal with him basically was your father, if he wasn't cussing too much at him. And but Frank, when he got involved with Brian's divorce, something seemed to happen, and he unfortunately fell on hard times. And you had, in those days, you had leaders like a Paul Hanover. Paul never had the financial wherewithal, but he was an outstanding leader in the community. You could always count on him to be involved in one fashion or another. You had Frank Shapiro. Frank Shapiro, family doctor, built up a real estate empire, and Frank was extremely active, both in the CJO and the Temple. As a matter of fact, Frank Shapiro, years and years ago, chaired the Committee on Jewish Education that ultimately led to the community funding the 3 educational institutions. And it was a very, very difficult job. We had the late Jack Schechter. Jack Schechter, family doctor, outstanding leader. Again, taken from us far too young. And he was very active. Now, Sam Taylor, well, there's nobody like Sam. Very, very my office used to be on John Street South, and Sam's office was on John Street South at the time. One day he comes up to me and he says, and I can't pin it down in time, it might have been late 60s, might have been early 70s. And he says, Bill, how do I get involved in the community? Because in those days I was putting in lots of hours. And I said, well, you come to the right person. And we got him involved in the Federation, and right up until Sam's death. I mean, Sam was one of the pillars of this community. And he was involved in pretty well every major Jewish organization. Great spokesman for us, and something that would always make us very proud. You had somebody like Zeke Zucker, and never got involved in the front. You would never see him in the foreground, never. Always in the background. And you could always count on him, you could always go to him, and he would be very supportive of you, but you couldn't push him. And but a very valuable man. Then his old sidekick in those days, Albert Tackerman. Albert, he was killed in an auto accident. Albert was extremely helpful to many causes. Jordan Livingston. Even from a community point of view, Jewish community point of view, probably his greatest contribution was toward Beth Jacob. And but if you were to consider his scoreboard for all his life achievements, it's what he did in the general community, which helped the Jewish community. You have David Steinberg.
I was going to ask you about David.
And
Talk about David a little bit.
all right, David, as you know, Wendy, is a very close friend. And I got David started in the Federation after he was finished with the Beth Jacob. And David is a person who only has one speed, and that's full speed. Is that if he gets committed to a cause, look out. And David, I mean, whether it's the Beth Jacob, which he returned to before he had his health problem recently, whether it was the Federation or the UJA, and then Seal became a UJA chairman, one of the few women in Hamilton has ever been an overall general chairman of the UJA. But with David, you got some people. It's very interesting, and we are involved with a group of friends. The group of friends are very interesting. Is that David and Seal are one couple. David's been president of a synagogue, president of the Federation, UJA chairman. Seal was UJA chairman. I think she was president of the Sisterhood. You've got Norm Bennett. Norm has been very involved in shul work, Federation work, B'nai B'rith. You've got Irwin and Sandy Fuss. Irwin was a past UJA chairman, and Sandy was a past women's chairman. You have Milton and Terry Lewis. Milton is a past Beth Jacob president, very involved in the liberal community in Hamilton. You have Jerry Sway. Jerry is a president of the Beth Jacob, past president of the, I think was he president of the Federation?
Yes.
I think he was, yes. And then he's been UJA chairman. You got Tommy Wise, who's probably our most involved Jewish citizen today, whether it's Bonds or whether it's JNF, and he's involved there, and I'm probably leaving somebody. Rob Pakin, when he lived in town, he was president of the or chairman of the UJA 1 year, and I think I've got everybody. If I have, somebody won't forgive me there. But it was very interesting. In order to get into our group of people, you had to be involved in the community. If you weren't involved in the community, then you had a difficulty. And of course, I suppose, speaking immodestly, nobody was involved as much as I was, because I was CJO chairman at age 32 for 3 years, and then I was UJA chairman for a number of years, and I was president of B'nai B'rith Canada and held some international posts, but then with the Canada-Israel Committee, you know, lots of things there. But we have in this community some excellent leaders